Laurel Baines had exactly 11 minutes to get across 4 city blocks in Vancouver, look presentable, and convince a room full of strangers that she was someone worth hiring. She was already failing at step 2. She ran, not jogged, ran, down Alberni Street with her portfolio tucked under one arm and her blazer half on, half off her shoulder like she was trying to escape from it. Her shoes, a pair of block heels she'd borrowed from her roommate Demi, were a full size too big. They slapped the pavement with every step like applause she hadn't earned. She had eaten a spinach wrap at the Pacific Center food court 15 minutes ago. This was her first mistake. She rounded the corner and stopped. There it was, the glassy, gleaming facade of Whitcomb Developments, a real estate firm that occupied the entire ground floor of a tower so new the concrete still smelled like ambition. The building's exterior was lined with floor-to-ceiling panels of dark, polished glass, reflective enough on the outside to show every cloud in the October sky, and conveniently every detail of Laurel's face. She leaned in. Her collar was crooked. Her lipstick had smudged. Her hair, which she had spent 22 minutes on that morning, had decided to stage a small rebellion near the left temple. She smoothed it down with her palm, straightened her collar with both hands, twisted slightly to check the back. She found the lipstick in her pocket, applied it with the focus of a surgeon, pressed her lips together. She smiled to check the result and went very still. There it was, a small, bright fragment of spinach wedged cheerfully between her 2 front teeth, as if it had claimed squatter's rights and had no intention of leaving. "You've got to be kidding me," she breathed. She tried her fingernail. Nothing. She tried the corner of a business card from her wallet. The spinach held firm. She pressed closer to the glass for better light, cheek practically touching the surface, one eye squinting, making a face that no grown adult should make in public, and certainly not on a street in downtown Vancouver. That was when the glass slid open. It was not, as it turned out, a wall. It was a door, a very large, very expensive sliding glass door, which had just been opened from the inside by a man in a charcoal suit who was either deeply amused or extremely good at hiding it. Behind him stood 3 other people holding coffees and tablets, clearly mid-meeting, all now staring at her. Laurel froze. Her fingertip was still pressed to her tooth. The man in the charcoal suit was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair, and the kind of composure that suggested he'd never in his entire life had anything stuck in his teeth. He looked at her the way someone looks at an unexpected weather event. Curious, slightly fascinated, not yet sure whether to be concerned. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was calm. There was something underneath it, not quite laughter, but the immediate potential for it. Laurel slowly lowered her hand. "I was," she said with great dignity, "using your building as a mirror." "I gathered. The spinach is gone, for the record." "Is it?" She ran her tongue across her teeth. "Mostly." The man tilted his head by exactly 3 degrees. "We have actual mirrors inside. Washrooms on the main floor." "That's very helpful to know for the future." She adjusted her blazer, stood straighter, and decided that the only exit from this situation was forward motion. "I have an interview, in this building, in about 7 minutes." "With whom?" "Whitcomb Developments, marketing coordinator position." Something shifted in his expression, though she couldn't quite name what. "Good luck," he said. "Thank you." She picked up her portfolio from where it had slid onto the sidewalk and turned toward the main entrance. Over her shoulder, "You might want to clean the door. I think I left a cheekprint." She heard, very faintly, someone inside the room laugh. Not the man in the suit, one of the others. The man in the suit said nothing, but when she glanced back once, she absolutely should not have glanced back. He was watching her walk away with an expression she couldn't read and didn't have time to decode. The receptionist at Whitcomb Developments had the kind of smile that came pre-installed, cheerful, practiced, professionally warm. She checked Laurel in, handed her a visitor badge, and gestured toward the elevators. "Mr. Whitcomb will be with you shortly, boardroom on 12. Laurel rode the elevator up and used the mirrored interior to confirm the spinach was completely gone. She took a breath. She rolled her shoulders. She was fine. The glass door incident was behind her, literally and figuratively. She walked into the boardroom. All glass walls and city views, and a long oval table, with leather chairs that probably cost more individually than her monthly rent. She sat at the end nearest the door because she liked having exits available, and smoothed her portfolio open on the table. Then the door opened, and Rafe Whitcomb walked in. She recognized him in the first half-second. Charcoal suit, dark hair, that exact level of composure. Laurel's mouth went dry. He saw her at the same moment, paused one beat, not long, just enough to confirm what he was seeing was real. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. "The marketing coordinator. The building." She pressed her lips together. "You're the CEO." "Rafe Whitcomb." He extended his hand across the table. "Laurel Baines." She shook it. Her palm was slightly sweaty. She hoped he didn't notice. He almost certainly noticed. "I want you to know that the cheekprint was an accident, and I'm a very serious professional." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Of course." "And the Spinach situation could have happened to anyone. Statistically speaking, yes. And she stopped herself, took a breath. "I'm going to stop explaining and let you ask the interview questions." He opened a folder already holding her resume. She recognized the paper, slightly crumpled at the corner from the run across town. He read in silence for a moment. Degree in Visual Communications, Certificate in Digital Marketing, 2.5 years as a junior designer in East Van. He looked up. "Why'd you leave?" "Layoffs, restructuring. Half the creative team went. I was among the first out." He nodded once, the way a person nods when they accept the truth of something without offering false comfort. She appreciated that. "Your portfolio. Right here." He moved to her side of the table without ceremony and went through it. Really looked, not the polite skimming she'd experienced at other places. He paused at a campaign mock-up she'd built on spec for a housing nonprofit. Studied it for a long moment. This one. Conceptual piece never ran. Why not? The client wanted something more. She searched for the word. "Corporate." "Beige," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "You think this industry is beige. I think a lot of things in this industry are beige. I think they don't have to be." He looked at her then, properly, in the way that doesn't feel like an assessment, but something closer to recognition. "Why do you want this job?" Laurel set her hands flat on the table. The honest answer was that her share of the rent in the apartment she shared with Demi and a landlady named Iris was 3 weeks overdue, that her freelance work had slowed to a trickle in September, and that she was tired of being the most capable person in every room she couldn't afford to stay in. But that wasn't the full answer, so she said both things. "Because I need the work," she said, "and because I'm good. I know what it looks like when marketing talks to people, instead of at them. I know how to make something feel real. That's not a skill you find in every portfolio, no matter how many awards are on the wall." Silence. "And," she added, "I figure I've already survived the most embarrassing first impression in the history of this company, so everything from here is statistically an improvement." He looked at her for a long moment, then he closed the folder. "Miss Baines, will be in touch by end of week." He called her that evening. "Before we go any further, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments, we'd love to know." Her first day at Whitcomb Development started with half a coffee spilled down her sleeve on the SkyTrain and ended with a sticky note on her monitor that read, in someone's looping handwriting, "Welcome, Spinach." Rafe had called her Miss Baines in the elevator that morning and nodded toward the glass lobby wall. "We cleaned the door for the record." "Appreciated," she'd said. That had been the extent of their conversation before he disappeared into a series of back-to-back meetings. Laurel's onboarding was handled by a marketing associate named Troy, who was efficient, friendly, and visibly delighted by the glass door story, which had apparently spread through the entire 12th floor by 9:15 a.m. Someone on the investment team saw the whole thing from inside, he told her, not even slightly apologetic. He described it in detail at the morning stand-up. "Wonderful," Laurel said. "So this is my legacy. Your nickname's already Spinach, just so you know." "Lovely. Could be worse. The last person to get a nickname was called Zip Tie for 8 months. I don't want to know why. Probably for the best." She pinned the welcome note to the edge of her monitor as a reminder not to take herself too seriously, arranged her pencils and folder tabs with quiet efficiency, and got to work. 2 days in, Rafe put her name on a client presentation that no junior associate had ever been invited to. Troy leaned over when the calendar invite appeared on her screen. "He does this," he said quietly. "Throws new people into the deep end. Says it's the only way to find out who can swim. What happens to the ones who can't?" "Still works here, manages the archive on 14. Laurel stared at her screen for a long moment. Then she opened a new document and started preparing. She didn't drown. She improvised, called on the only thing she actually had, which was the ability to explain complicated things in ways designed for real human beings. And by the time she sat back down, 3 people were nodding who hadn't been nodding before. After the meeting, Rafe fell into step beside her in the hallway without preamble. "You didn't warn me you'd do that," she said. "Would a warning have helped?" She thought about it honestly. Probably not. "Then I saved us both time." He glanced sideways. "The part about a home that actually feels like one. Unscripted?" "Everything I said was unscripted." "I know." Another sideways glance. "Good instinct." That was all. He turned toward his office. She stood in the hallway holding her folder and felt, for the first time since she'd started, like she might actually belong somewhere. 3 weeks in, the rent notice arrived in 2 forms. A letter slid under the door and a text at 7:43 in the morning. Laurel sat on the edge of her bed in the room she shared with the sound of Renfrew Street traffic and looked at both for a long time. She didn't tell anyone at work. She smiled through the morning, stayed late to finish a campaign concept, and was still at her desk at 6 when the floor had emptied out. Rafe came out of a meeting that had clearly run over, loosening his tie as he walked. He stopped at her desk. "It's after 6, he said. "I know. You don't have to be here. I'm aware." He was quiet for a moment. She kept her eyes on the screen. "Laurel." She looked up. He rarely used her first name. "Is everything all right?" The easy answer was yes. She'd been giving that answer for 3 weeks. But something in the directness of the question, no softening, no performance of concern, made her tell the truth instead. "I'm 2 months behind on rent," she said. "I'll sort it. I just need some time." He didn't react the way most people did. No flinch, no over-empathetic pause, no rush to fill the silence with something useless. He pulled a chair from the nearest empty desk and sat down, and then he told her, in 3 sentences and no fanfare, about the company's employee support program. The way you'd describe a staircase to someone looking for a way up. "It's not charity," he said. "It's a bridge, repaid over time, interest-free, deducted from payroll at whatever rate works. About 40 people have used it since I introduced the program." She looked at him. "You started it." "Someone helped me once, a long time ago, when I was in a position I'd rather not detail at a Whitcomb Developments orientation." He stood. "Think about it, no pressure." She thought about it for 16 hours. Then she walked into his office and said yes. He processed it himself, quietly, and never mentioned it again. "Let's play a small game. If you've made it this far into the story, type the word maple in the comments. Only the real ones will know what it means. Now, back to Laurel and Rafe. The elevator on the west side of the building had been temperamental all November. Everyone knew. Everyone used it anyway, because the east elevators were slower, and you had to walk past the printer on 14, which jammed constantly and seemed to take it personally. Laurel stepped in at 5:15 on a Thursday, still holding her laptop, still mentally rewriting copy she'd been struggling with all day. The doors started to close. A hand stopped them. Rafe stepped in. They stood on opposite sides of the elevator, the way 2 people do when they're both pretending not to notice the other person. The doors slid shut, the numbers counted up. Then, between 8 and 9, the elevator stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Complete stillness. The small overhead screen that normally scrolled the weather forecast went blank. "Okay," Laurel said. "It does this," Rafe said. "Does it resolve itself?" "Usually within 5 minutes." She looked at the ceiling. "I feel like the universe is trying to communicate with me. What would it be saying? That I should have taken the stairs." She set her laptop against the wall and slid down to sit on the floor of the elevator, back against the wall, because 5 minutes might as well be comfortable. Also possibly that I should have become a librarian. He looked at her for a moment. Then he did something she genuinely didn't expect. He sat down too, across from her, back against the opposite wall, long legs stretched in front of him. "You'd be a terrible librarian," he said. "Excuse me?" "You'd narrate everything. You'd tell people what to think about the books before they'd read them. That's called enthusiasm. In a library, it's called disturbing the peace." She laughed, actually laughed, quick and real and slightly surprised by itself. He watched it happen like he was noting something for later. The elevator was very quiet. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You're going to regardless. Why do you keep putting me in rooms I'm not supposed to be in? The client presentation, the planning session last week, the thing with the architects." He was quiet for a moment, not evasive considering. "Because the people who are supposed to be in those rooms say the same things," he said, "and you don't." She looked at him across the 3 feet of elevator floor between them. He was looking back, and there was nothing managed in it. No CEO composure, no careful impression. Just him, jacket slightly wrinkled for the first time she'd ever seen, back against a wall, tired the way real people get tired. "Rafe," she said, and then wasn't entirely sure what she'd meant to follow with. The elevator jolted back to life. They both looked up at the ceiling. The screen restarted, the numbers resumed climbing. Laurel got to her feet and picked up her laptop without looking at him, because looking at him felt like something that required a moment to prepare for. 5 minutes, she said. Give or take. The doors opened on 12. She stepped out. He stayed in. His floor was higher. "Good night, Laurel," he said. She looked back once, hand on the doorframe. "Good night, Rafe." The doors closed. She walked to her desk and sat down and stared at her screen, without reading a single word on it, for 4 full minutes. The office gossip arrived in waves, as it always does. First a trickle. Someone had seen them walk out of the parkade together one Tuesday, which was not romantic and had only happened because they'd both stayed late and the SkyTrain timing matched. Then the elevator story got out through facilities, and by the next morning, Troy gave her a look that was equal parts sympathy and delight. "It's not a thing," she told him. "Okay," he said, in the voice of someone who believes a thing completely. "We were stuck. We sat down. That's it." "Sure." "Stop making that face." "I'm not making any face." She pulled her keyboard toward her with more force than necessary. The company sent her to a conference in Montreal in late November. 3 days, a panel on marketing in the real estate sector, a hotel room nicer than anywhere she'd ever stayed. Rafe was meant to send a different associate. He changed the attendee list 2 weeks before the event, with no explanation offered to anyone. She found out from Troy. She went to Rafe's office. "Montreal," she said. He looked up from his screen. "You've heard." "Why me?" "You're ready." He said it the way he said most things, like a fact, not an opinion. "The panel is on making real estate accessible to first-time buyers. You have a perspective on that. The others don't." She stood in his doorway a moment longer. "You could have asked me first. You would have said you weren't ready." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I would have said yes," she said. "I just also would have said I was nervous. That's the same thing as saying you're ready." She went to Montreal. She was nervous. She was also, to her own bewilderment, excellent. She stood at the front of a conference room and said things like affordable shouldn't mean afterthought, and a first home is an emotional purchase before it's a financial one, and people wrote them down. An older developer in the front row, the kind who came to these events mainly to be seen leaving early, stayed for the entire panel and asked her 3 questions afterwards. She texted Rafe that night from her hotel room. Panel went well. They asked about the Vancouver market, and I improvised something about a spinach wrap, and I think it actually worked. He replied, "Of course it did." And then a moment later, "Well done, Laurel." She sat with her phone in both hands and the Montreal skyline through the window and felt something she'd been trying not to feel for 2 months. The realization that she had started looking forward to a specific person in the way that makes your day feel different when they're not in it. Back in Vancouver, she started taking the stairs. She told herself it was for the exercise. Troy told her it was obvious. She told Troy to mind his filing. Rafe noticed, of course he noticed, and said nothing, which was its own kind of noticing. The distance lasted 3 weeks. She was professional. She was good at her job. She was almost convincing. Then, on a Wednesday, Rafe gathered the full marketing team for a quarterly briefing, and near the end, seemingly off script, he said, "The direction we've taken this quarter wouldn't exist without someone on this team who has the particular skill of making complicated things feel human." That doesn't sound like a business skill. It is. He didn't look at her. He was very carefully not looking at her. We'll be expanding that approach going forward. It works because it's real. Troy beside her didn't even try to hide it. He pointed at her under the table with his pen. After the meeting cleared, she walked to Rafe's office and knocked on the open door. He looked up. "You could have just said my name," she said. "It wasn't appropriate for the setting. It was a team meeting." "I know." She stepped inside and stood there, and the thing she'd been carrying for 3 weeks felt suddenly heavier, like something you only notice when you finally set it down. "I've been taking the stairs," she said. "I know. That's not great." "No." She crossed her arms over her chest, not so much defensively as structurally, because her chest felt like it needed some reinforcement just at this moment. "I don't know how to do this without making everything strange," she said. "The job, you, all of it." He came around the desk, not rushing, just closing the distance the way you cross a room when you've already decided you're going to. "I don't think you're actually afraid of it being strange," he said. "I think you're afraid of being wrong about what you're feeling." She looked up at him. He was close enough that she could see the very slight unevenness of his collar, which was the most human-looking thing about him. "Are you always right?" she said. "No," a pause. "Ask me again in 6 months." She laughed, the real kind, the surprised kind, and something that had been tight in her shoulders for weeks finally let go. "I like you," she said. "That's the whole problem. I like you." "That," he said, "is not a problem." They took it slowly. Dinner at a small Japanese place on Robson Street, where the tables were close and the menu had pictures. A walk through Gastown on a cold Saturday, her hands in her pockets, his shoulder occasionally bumping hers. Cooking at her apartment, she discovered he could make exactly one dish, a lentil soup that was genuinely excellent and nothing else. He discovered she owned 17 mugs, all with text on them, and read each one with the gravity of a man reviewing legal contracts. "This one says, 'But first, coffee and the O is made from a coffee bean,'" he said. A classic. "You own 3 variations of this mug. They're emotionally distinct." He looked at her. "How?" "The fonts are different. It changes the energy entirely." He set the mug down with great deliberate care. She burst out laughing and couldn't stop. She learned that he read the last page of a book first. He learned that she talked to houseplants, specifically a pothos on the kitchen windowsill named Fig, who received regular pep talks when it looked droopy. He would never admit it out loud, but he bought a small succulent for his office desk sometime in January and occasionally addressed it directly. In March, he took her to Stanley Park. It was a Sunday late afternoon, the light doing the particular Vancouver thing of turning everything gold just before it gave up entirely. They walked the seawall from Second Beach and ended up on a bench overlooking Burrard Inlet, with the North Shore Mountains still holding their snow and the water going all shades of gray-blue. It was cold. She had borrowed his scarf, a dark green wool one she had decided she was keeping, and was wearing it over her own coat. He reached into his pocket. She looked over. He held out a small box, which she accepted mostly because her hands moved before her brain did. She opened it. Inside, a keychain, a small polished hand mirror shape in hammered silver with something engraved on the back. She tilted it toward the light to read it. "For when the glass walls aren't available." She looked at him. Her throat did something complicated. "You had this made," she said. "Weeks ago." "Weeks." "I was waiting for the right moment." He paused. "There's a second thing." He reached back into the same pocket and produced a ring, which was so straightforward and unperformative and exactly like him that she somehow hadn't seen it coming at all. "Laurel Baines," he said, "you used my building as a mirror. You had spinach in your teeth. You told me my glass needed cleaning, and then you walked into my boardroom and made me rethink the way I do half my job." He looked at her, steady, certain. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life not knowing what you're going to say next. Marry me." She was already crying, which she would later blame on the wind, and which no one would believe. "Yes," she said, and then, "For the record, I had completely removed the spinach before I said anything." "You hadn't." "I had. I have a very clear memory." "Rafe." "Yes?" "Put the ring on my finger before I argue you into oblivion." He did. They were married on a September Saturday at a small ceremony in the Okanagan, a vineyard outside Penticton, late afternoon, the hills turning amber around them. Demi cried from the third row. Troy, who had made the guest list through sheer persistence and 3 months of strategic helpfulness, was the first one on the dance floor. Rafe wore a dark blue suit. Laurel wore a dress she'd found at a consignment shop on Commercial Drive and altered herself, staying up past midnight for a week to get it right. When he saw her walking toward him across the grass, something moved in his face that he had never let move in any boardroom, any negotiation, or any moment she had witnessed in 3 years of knowing him. She carried the small silver keychain in her bouquet, tucked between the stems of eucalyptus and ranunculus, because it seemed wrong to leave it at home. In her vows, she said, "You saw me at my most ridiculous, and you hired me anyway. Everything after that was just details." The room laughed. He smiled, the full kind, the one he didn't ration. 7 months later, on an ordinary Tuesday, Laurel met him at the door of their apartment in East Van, a proper place with a second bedroom that currently held a kayak neither of them had used and approximately 40 of her mugs, wearing an expression he had never seen on her before. She handed him a small package. Inside, a mug, white and clean with a single line of text in the exact font she had once told him created the correct energy. It said, "Dad in training." He stared at it. She watched his face do the thing faces do when the body understands something before the mind has fully caught up. "Laurel." "About 10 weeks, she said. "I just found out this morning." He set the mug down on the counter, very carefully, as though it had become something precious, and crossed the kitchen and held her. Not dramatically, just completely. They stayed like that for a long time, in the quiet of an ordinary Tuesday in Vancouver, with the October rain coming in off the harbor and Fig the Pothos, leaning toward the window light, and the city going on outside the way cities do. Indifferent and beautiful and full of glass walls that, on the right afternoon, at exactly the right angle, catch the light and show you something you were never expecting to see.